Respect is one of the most misunderstood forces in human nature. Most people spend their entire lives chasing it, asking for it, demanding it, complaining when they don't receive it. They believe that if they are kind enough, patient enough, generous enough, people will naturally appreciate them. But the world doesn't work according to intentions. It works according to perception. Human beings rarely judge you by what is inside your heart. They judge you by the signals you consistently send. And the harsh truth is this: the moment people sense that you desperately need their approval, they unconsciously place themselves above you. That is the beginning of disrespect. Think about the people who naturally command a room without saying much. They don't announce their importance. They don't constantly remind everyone of their achievements. They don't argue with every critic or explain every decision they make. Yet when they enter, conversations shift. Eyes follow them. Their words carry weight. Why? Because they understand something that most people never learn. Respect is never requested. It is communicated silently through behavior. The greatest mistake you can make is believing that respect comes from convincing others that you deserve it. The more you explain your value, the more people wonder why you have to explain it at all. True confidence never advertises itself. It simply exists. A lion never walks through the jungle, announcing that it is the king. Its presence is enough. Likewise, powerful individuals don't spend their energy proving themselves. Their consistency does the talking. Observe how people behave when they meet someone new. Within minutes, sometimes even seconds, they begin forming conclusions. Is this person confident? Are they secure? Can they be manipulated? Will they tolerate disrespect? These judgments happen almost instantly, often without a single word being spoken. Your posture speaks before your mouth does. Your eye contact speaks before your first sentence. The pace of your movements, the calmness of your voice, even your willingness to remain silent under pressure. All of these become signals that people interpret subconsciously. This is why confidence is not about appearing loud. It is about appearing settled. There is a difference. Loudness often hides insecurity. Calmness reveals certainty. The strongest person in the room is rarely the one speaking the most. It is often the one listening carefully, choosing words deliberately, and refusing to be emotionally pulled into unnecessary conflict. Many people fear silence because they think silence makes them invisible. In reality, strategic silence makes people pay attention. Notice how uncomfortable others become when you refuse to react immediately. They expect explanations. They expect emotional outbursts. They expect you to defend yourself. But when you remain composed, you force them to confront uncertainty. Uncertainty creates psychological pressure far greater than anger ever could. There is another dangerous habit that quietly destroys respect: the constant desire to be liked by everyone. It sounds noble, but it comes at an enormous cost. The person who tries to please everyone eventually stands for nothing. Every opinion changes depending on the audience. Every decision depends on approval. Every boundary becomes negotiable. People may enjoy such a person's company, but they rarely admire them. Admiration requires strength, and strength requires the willingness to disappoint people when necessary. Understand this clearly. Being respectful is not the same as being submissive. Being kind does not mean allowing yourself to become invisible. The most respected individuals combine warmth with firmness. They treat everyone with dignity, but they never sacrifice their principles just to avoid temporary discomfort. That quiet balance is what earns lasting respect. The world constantly tests your standards. Sometimes the tests are obvious. Other times they are subtle. Someone interrupts you repeatedly. Someone dismisses your opinion. Someone arrives late without apology. Someone makes a joke at your expense to entertain others. These moments appear insignificant, but they reveal how people are measuring your limits. Every interaction teaches people what you will tolerate. If you continuously ignore your own standards, others will eventually ignore them too. Powerful individuals understand that self-respect begins long before anyone else respects them. They don't wait for permission to value themselves. Their routines reflect discipline. Their words reflect purpose. Their actions match their promises. They become dependable because they first become dependable to themselves. This internal consistency creates an invisible authority that others instinctively recognize. There is something fascinating about human psychology. People trust certainty even when they disagree with it. They are naturally drawn toward those who appear emotionally grounded, not because perfection is attractive, but because stability is rare. In a world where most people react impulsively, complain endlessly, and seek constant validation, the individual who remains centered immediately becomes memorable. Never confuse arrogance with confidence. Arrogance demands attention because it secretly fears being ignored. Confidence doesn't need applause. It continues moving whether anyone notices or not. Arrogance compares itself to everyone else. Confidence competes only with yesterday's version of itself. That difference changes everything. People may envy arrogance, but they respect confidence. Your standards should never depend on who is watching. Character is built in private, long before it is recognized in public. Every promise you keep to yourself strengthens your identity. Every difficult choice you make without seeking praise reinforces your self-respect. Eventually, this becomes visible without effort. People begin to sense that you are not easily influenced, not easily intimidated, and not easily manipulated. Remember, people do not fear loud voices. They fear unwavering principles. They become careful around individuals who consistently honor themselves because they know manipulation will not succeed. That is why true respect has nothing to do with intimidation. It has everything to do with quiet certainty. So before you expect the world to respect you, ask yourself a deeper question. Does your own behavior communicate that you respect yourself? Because the world almost always follows the example you set for it. And once you master that silent authority, you'll understand why real respect is never chased. It is quietly earned. One of the greatest mistakes people make is believing that disrespect begins with a major betrayal. They imagine it starts with public humiliation, harsh insults, or someone openly challenging them. But that is almost never how it happens. Disrespect is rarely explosive in the beginning. It is gradual. It grows quietly, almost invisibly, through a series of small moments that most people choose to ignore. And those moments determine how every future interaction will unfold. Human nature has always been curious about limits. Every person, consciously or unconsciously, tests boundaries. Children do it with parents. Employees do it with managers. Friends do it with each other. Even strangers do it within seconds of meeting someone. It is not always malicious. Often, it is simply psychological. People want to know where the line is. They want to discover what behavior is acceptable and what behavior carries consequences. Imagine someone interrupts you while you're speaking. Perhaps you dismiss it as an accident. Then they interrupt you again the next day, and again the following week. Before long, your opinions are no longer heard because you unknowingly taught them that your voice can be ignored without consequence. It wasn't the interruption itself that mattered. It was your repeated acceptance of it. This is how respect slowly disappears. Not through one dramatic event, but through countless silent permissions. Someone arrives 30 minutes late to meet you without apologizing. They cancel plans repeatedly at the last minute. They make jokes at your expense in front of others and call it just having fun. They borrow something and never return it. They promise to help but disappear when you need them. None of these actions seem devastating by themselves. Yet together, they reveal a pattern that says they have learned your standards, are flexible enough to ignore. Most people remain silent because they fear appearing difficult. They tell themselves, it's not worth making an issue out of something so small. But the problem is never the single event. The problem is the message that silence sends. Every time you ignore behavior that violates your standards, you communicate something without speaking. You tell the other person that the behavior is acceptable. Human beings are incredibly responsive to patterns. If an action produces no resistance, it usually becomes repeated behavior. Power is not established during major confrontations. It is established during ordinary moments, the little conversations, the everyday decisions, the quiet responses that reveal your standards long before a serious conflict ever appears. There is a reason psychologically dominant individuals pay attention to small details. They understand that today's small disrespect becomes tomorrow's expectation. Once expectations are established, changing them becomes far more difficult. People resist losing privileges they have already been given. This is why boundaries are not walls built out of anger. They are lines drawn out of self-respect. Many people misunderstand boundaries because they associate them with conflict. They imagine shouting, arguing, or creating unnecessary tension. In reality, healthy boundaries are usually calm. They don't require emotional explosions. Sometimes they require only a simple sentence delivered with confidence. Please don't interrupt me. I don't appreciate those jokes. That doesn't work for me. Short, clear, respectful. No unnecessary explanation. No apology for protecting your own standards. Not as something important here. You are not trying to control another person's behavior. You are controlling what you will accept. That distinction changes everything. You cannot force people to respect you, but you absolutely decide who gains continued access to your time, energy, and attention. The strongest people understand that consequences teach lessons more effectively than arguments. Endless debates rarely change behavior. Consistent standards do. Think about water slowly carving through stone. It doesn't happen because of one powerful impact. It happens because of consistent pressure over time. Respect works exactly the same way. Every decision either strengthens your position or weakens it. Every response either reinforces your standards or slowly erodes them. Many individuals become trapped because they confuse patience with tolerance. Patience is giving someone room to improve after recognizing a mistake. Tolerance becomes dangerous when repeated behavior continues without accountability. The difference is enormous. There will always be people who test your limits. Some will do it intentionally. Others won't even realize they're doing it. Regardless of their intentions, your response teaches them what happens next. Notice how truly respected individuals rarely have to repeat themselves. They don't constantly remind people how they expect to be treated. Their behavior has already established the pattern. Others know where the line exists because they have seen consistency. Consistency is what creates credibility, not occasional firmness followed by endless compromise. but steady, predictable standards that never depend on mood or convenience. There is another psychological principle most people overlook. People often value what requires responsibility. If access to you is always available, regardless of how you're treated, your presence becomes ordinary. But when your time, attention, and trust are protected by clear standards, people naturally become more mindful of how they interact with you. This isn't manipulation, it's human psychology. Scarcity increases appreciation. Unlimited availability often decreases it. Remember that respecting yourself does not require becoming cold or hostile. You can remain compassionate while refusing repeated disrespect. You can forgive someone without allowing the same behavior to continue indefinitely. Strength and kindness are not opposites. In fact, they are most powerful when they exist together. Your future relationships, your career, your friendships, and even your reputation are built upon thousands of seemingly insignificant moments. Most people ignore those moments because they appear too small to matter. But those tiny moments become habits. Habits become expectations, and expectations eventually become the foundation of every relationship you have. If you want people to think twice before disrespecting you, never wait until the damage becomes impossible to ignore. Protect the small boundaries today, because they decide whether larger boundaries will ever need defending tomorrow. The people who value you will respect your standards, and those who refuse them reveal exactly where they belong in your life. There is a strange paradox in human behavior that very few people ever understand. The louder someone becomes when they are challenged, the weaker they often appear. Most people believe anger is a sign of strength. They believe raising their voice, arguing aggressively, or immediately defending themselves proves confidence. But if you study human psychology carefully, you discover the opposite is usually true. The person who loses control first often loses the invisible battle long before the conversation is over. Emotional control is one of the rarest forms of power because it cannot be faked for very long. Under pressure, everyone's true character eventually reveals itself. Think about why people provoke others in the first place. Rarely is it because they simply want to express an opinion. More often, they are searching for a reaction. A reaction tells them they have influence over your emotional state. The moment they can make you angry, frustrated, defensive, or desperate, they have confirmed something important to themselves. They know they can control the direction of the interaction. This is why insults are often less about the words themselves and more about the response they create. Imagine someone deliberately criticizes you in front of others. They expect your face to change. They expect your voice to rise. They expect you to immediately explain yourself or attack them in return. In that moment, they are not studying your argument. They are studying your emotional discipline. If your emotions become predictable, you become predictable. And predictable people are easy to manipulate. Powerful individuals understand this principle deeply. They know that every emotional reaction carries information. Every unnecessary explanation reveals insecurity. Every impulsive response exposes weak points that others can use again later. This is why emotionally disciplined people never allow temporary feelings to dictate permanent decisions. There is an old pattern that repeats itself throughout history. Leaders who ruled only through rage eventually lost influence because people learned how to provoke them. Once someone understands your emotional triggers, they no longer fear your strength. They simply press the right button at the right moment. The truly dangerous individual is not the one who explodes, It is the one who remains calm when everyone expects chaos. Calmness creates uncertainty, and uncertainty creates psychological pressure. When someone insults you and receives no emotional reward, something unusual happens inside their mind. They begin questioning themselves. Was the insult ineffective? Did it fail? Did you simply not care? Suddenly, the attention shifts away from you and toward them. Instead of controlling the situation, they begin analyzing it. Silence has a unique psychological effect because human beings naturally try to fill empty spaces. Most people cannot tolerate uncertainty for long. They start replaying the interaction repeatedly, searching for meaning. Meanwhile, the person who stayed calm has already moved on. This does not mean you should remain silent forever or accept disrespect without response. Emotional control is not emotional suppression. There is an important difference. Suppression hides emotions until they eventually explode. Control allows you to experience emotions without allowing them to control your behavior. The strongest response is often delayed, intentional, and measured. Instead of reacting immediately, you observe. Instead of defending yourself, you gather information. Instead of speaking emotionally, you choose words that cannot be used against you later. This ability separates those who are ruled by emotion from those who rule themselves. Notice how experienced negotiators behave during difficult conversations. They rarely rush to answer accusations. They pause, they think, they ask questions, they slow the pace. Why? Because slowing the conversation gives emotions time to settle, while forcing the other person to reveal more than they originally intended. Most people talk too much when they feel attacked. Powerful people become more observant. Every conflict contains two battles. The visible battle is the conversation itself. The invisible battle is emotional control. Whoever wins the invisible battle usually wins the visible one shortly afterward. Consider how often regret follows emotional decisions. Angry messages sent in seconds destroy relationships built over years. One uncontrolled outburst damages reputations that took decades to establish. A single emotional reaction can provide enemies with exactly the evidence they were hoping to collect. This is why discipline is far more valuable than intelligence during conflict. Intelligence helps you understand situations. Discipline helps you survive them. People often confuse calmness with weakness because they mistake noise for strength. But look closely at nature. The deepest ocean moves with remarkable calm, while storms only disturb the surface. Mountains remain unmoved despite violent winds. The strongest structures are not those that react to pressure, but those that absorb it without collapsing. Human beings are no different. When your emotions remain steady under pressure, people begin viewing you differently. They recognize that intimidation no longer works. Manipulation becomes ineffective. Personal attacks lose their impact because they fail to produce the desired reaction. Ironically, this often reduces future conflict altogether. Bullies seek easy victories. Manipulators seek emotional targets. They rarely continue attacking people who refuse to become emotionally predictable. There is another hidden advantage to emotional control. It improves judgment. Anger narrows perception. Fear exaggerates danger. Pride rejects valuable feedback. But calmness allows you to see the situation as it truly is rather than as your emotions temporarily describe it. That clarity becomes a competitive advantage in every area of life, whether in business, relationships, leadership, or personal growth. Those who think clearly while others react emotionally consistently make better decisions. Remember, Remaining calm does not mean allowing others to walk over you. It simply means your response is guided by purpose rather than impulse. Sometimes that response will be direct. Sometimes it will involve creating distance. Sometimes it will involve ending a relationship completely. But whatever action you take will come from strength instead of emotional chaos. People respect individuals whose actions remain consistent, regardless of pressure, because consistency creates trust. They know where you stand. They know your principles cannot be shaken by temporary emotions. That kind of stability is rare, and rarity naturally attracts respect. The moment you stop giving people control over your emotions is the moment they begin losing control over you. And once your emotions obey your judgment instead of your impulses, your presence alone begins to command a level of respect that anger could never achieve. There is a truth about power that many people spend their entire lives avoiding because it demands responsibility instead of excuses. If you want people to think twice before disrespecting you, stop focusing on making yourself more intimidating and start focusing on making yourself more valuable. Fear created through aggression lasts only until someone stronger appears. But respect earned through value continues even in your absence. The most powerful people are rarely those who threaten others. They are the ones whose presence improves every room they enter and whose absence leaves a noticeable void. Ask yourself a simple question. Why do some people lose opportunities, friendships, and relationships so easily, while others are constantly sought after? It is not because they are louder. It is not because they demand attention. It is because they have developed qualities that are difficult to replace. Human beings naturally protect what they believe is valuable. They become careful around people whose contribution cannot be easily duplicated. This is where most individuals make a costly mistake. They spend enormous amounts of energy trying to convince others to appreciate them instead of investing that same energy into becoming someone impossible to ignore. They chase validation instead of building value. They seek compliments instead of competence. They become obsessed with appearances while neglecting substance. But the world eventually exposes the difference. Imagine two people entering the same workplace. One constantly seeks approval, agrees with everyone, and desperately wants to fit in. The other quietly develops new skills, solves difficult problems, remains dependable, and consistently delivers results. Months later, who becomes more respected? Not because they demanded respect, but because their value became undeniable. Competence creates confidence. Confidence creates influence. Influence naturally creates respect. This principle extends far beyond careers. It shapes friendships, families, business partnerships, and romantic relationships. When people know that your character, your wisdom, your loyalty, your discipline, or your abilities genuinely improve their lives, they begin treating your presence differently. They become more careful with your time. They become more thoughtful with their words. Not because you force them to, but because losing access to you suddenly carries a cost. This is an important distinction. You are not trying to make people fear you. You are becoming someone they fear losing. Those are two completely different forms of power. One depends on intimidation. The other depends on value. History repeatedly demonstrates this principle. Individuals remembered for generations were rarely remembered because they intimidated everyone around them. They were remembered because they created something meaningful, mastered valuable skills, or developed extraordinary discipline. Their influence survived because it was built upon contribution rather than control, many people underestimate the psychological effect of scarcity. We naturally appreciate what is rare. Air is essential, yet we barely notice it because it is always available. Gold is valuable largely because it is scarce. The same principle quietly operates within human relationships. When your attention is available to everyone at every moment, it gradually loses perceived value. But when your time is guided by purpose, your standards, and your priorities, people begin respecting it. Notice that truly successful individuals rarely appear desperate for company. They enjoy relationships, but they are not emotionally dependent upon constant approval. They have goals, they have routines, they have missions larger than temporary validation. Their identity does not collapse simply because someone dislikes them. That independence creates quiet strength. Dependence creates vulnerability. The more your happiness relies upon other people's opinions, the easier you become to manipulate. When your fulfillment comes from your own growth, discipline, and purpose, manipulation loses its power. Becoming valuable also requires continuous evolution. The moment you believe you have learned enough, someone else begins improving while you remain still. The world respects those who remain students regardless of their success. Every new skill you acquire expands your confidence. Every difficult challenge you overcome strengthens your resilience. Every promise you keep to yourself increases your self-respect. People notice these things even if they never mention them. Your confidence changes. Your posture changes. Your decisions become more decisive. Your conversations become more thoughtful. Without realizing it, others begin responding differently because they sense internal growth. There is another lesson hidden inside this principle. Never make one person your entire world. Whether it is a friend, a relationship, or a workplace, emotional dependence weakens your position. If all your confidence depends upon keeping one individual happy, you slowly surrender your freedom. You become afraid to disagree, afraid to establish boundaries, afraid to walk away when necessary. Power begins returning the moment you remember that your greatest investment should always be yourself. Build knowledge that nobody can take away. Develop discipline that survives difficult seasons. Protect your physical and mental health. Strengthen your communication. Master emotional control. Improve your financial independence. These forms of wealth continue generating influence long after temporary popularity disappears. Many people wonder why certain individuals appear naturally respected wherever they go. It is rarely luck. It is usually the accumulated result of years spent improving quietly while others chased immediate attention. The strongest reputation is built in silence. Nobody applauds the early mornings spent learning new skills. Nobody celebrates the difficult habits repeated every day. Nobody notices the private sacrifices required for excellence. But eventually everyone notices the results. By then, respect arrives without invitation. Understand something that changes everything. You cannot stop every person from disrespecting you. There will always be insecure individuals who criticize, compete, or project their frustrations onto others. Your goal is not universal approval. Your goal is becoming so grounded in your own value that other people's opinions no longer determine your direction. Ironically, that is when respect becomes easier to obtain. People trust those who trust themselves. They follow those who have clear purpose. They admire those who continue growing regardless of applause. When your identity becomes rooted in continuous self-development instead of external validation, every interaction changes. You stop chasing attention because your mission becomes more important than recognition. You stop arguing over your worth because your actions speak louder than explanations. You stop fearing rejection because your value no longer depends upon universal acceptance. And when losing access to your time, your character, and your presence becomes a genuine loss, people naturally become far more careful about how they choose to treat you. One of the greatest misconceptions about strength is the belief that every act of disrespect deserves a response. Many people assume that if they remain silent, they appear weak. They believe they must answer every insult, defend every rumor, correct every misunderstanding, and win every argument. But this mindset quietly traps them. They spend their lives reacting to other people's behavior instead of directing their own lives. The truly powerful understand a different principle. Not every battle deserves your attention, because attention itself is one of your most valuable resources. Think about the psychology behind an argument. Most arguments are not created to discover truth. They are created to gain emotional control. When someone repeatedly tries to provoke you, they often want one thing above all else: your energy. The moment you become emotionally invested, they have succeeded. They have redirected your focus away from your purpose and toward their agenda. This is why silence can become one of the most powerful responses available. Silence is often misunderstood because people confuse it with surrender. But strategic silence is not surrender. It is discipline. It is the conscious decision to refuse participation in a game that offers no reward. It is understanding that your peace has greater value than proving yourself to someone who has already decided not to understand you. Notice how insecure people become when they cannot predict your response. They expect explanations. They expect emotional reactions. They expect endless messages trying to repair the situation. But when none of those things arrive, uncertainty begins working inside their own mind. Human beings naturally search for closure. We dislike unanswered questions. When someone who normally reacts suddenly becomes calm and distant, curiosity replaces certainty. The other person begins wondering what changed. They replay conversations. They analyze past behavior. They begin questioning assumptions they previously ignored. This is the psychological power of controlled distance. Distance communicates what arguments often cannot. Imagine someone repeatedly ignores your boundaries. You explain your feelings once. They dismiss them. You explain again. They dismiss them again. At some point, continuing the conversation stops being productive. Every additional explanation lowers the value of your words because it teaches the other person that your standards exist only in conversation, never in action. Powerful individuals understand that boundaries become real only when supported by behavior. Sometimes the strongest sentence you can speak is no sentence at all. Sometimes the strongest answer is simply changing your availability, reducing your attention, protecting your time, directing your energy toward people who value it. This is not manipulation. It is self-respect. There is an important difference between using silence as punishment and using silence as protection. Punishment attempts to control another person's emotions. Protection safeguards your own peace. The motivation matters. If your silence exists only to make someone suffer, you remain emotionally attached to their reaction. But if your silence exists because you recognize your energy deserves a healthier environment, then your peace no longer depends on what they choose to do. The strongest people do not withdraw because they are afraid. They withdraw because they know where their attention produces the greatest return. Look carefully at successful leaders, disciplined professionals, and emotionally mature individuals. They rarely argue endlessly with critics. They rarely chase people who repeatedly disrespect them. They understand that time spent convincing unwilling minds is time stolen from meaningful progress. This is one of the hardest lessons in life. Not everyone deserves continued access to you. Many people believe loyalty means remaining available, regardless of how they are treated. But loyalty without standards eventually becomes self-neglect. Healthy relationships require mutual respect. When respect disappears and only one person continues investing effort, the relationship slowly becomes an emotional burden rather than a source of strength. Sometimes people only recognize value after experiencing absence. This is another uncomfortable truth about human psychology. People often overlook what remains constantly available. Routine creates familiarity. Familiarity sometimes reduces appreciation. When access changes, perception often changes with it. That does not mean disappearing to create drama. It means refusing to reward repeated disrespect with unlimited access. If someone consistently ignores your kindness, perhaps your kindness is being offered in the wrong place. If someone repeatedly dismisses your effort, perhaps your effort deserves a different audience. Your energy is limited, your time is limited, your attention is limited. Spend these resources where they can grow rather than where they constantly disappear. Many individuals remain trapped because they fear being misunderstood. They continue explaining themselves long after the other person has stopped listening. They keep trying to prove their intentions, hoping eventually someone will appreciate them. But here is the reality. Some people benefit from misunderstanding you. As long as you remain busy defending yourself, you remain distracted from building yourself. Powerful people recognize this trap early. Instead of obsessing over controlling opinions, they focus on controlling actions. Reputation is built through consistency, not endless explanations. Eventually, those who matter recognize the difference. Those who don't were never your audience to begin with. There is tremendous confidence in walking away peacefully from situations that no longer align with your standards. Not because you hate anyone, not because you seek revenge, simply because your future matters more than unnecessary conflict. Walking away requires far more strength than staying in endless battles. Anyone can react emotionally. Very few can leave with dignity. Remember that silence does not always mean saying nothing forever. Sometimes it simply means delaying your response until emotion no longer controls it. Sometimes it means refusing to respond publicly while addressing the issue privately. Sometimes it means ending a conversation instead of prolonging an argument that serves no purpose. Wisdom is knowing which response creates the greatest long-term strength. The goal is never to make people fear your anger. The goal is to make them understand that access to your attention, trust, and presence is earned through mutual respect. Once people realize your peace cannot be purchased with arguments, manipulated through guilt, or shaken by unnecessary drama, they begin approaching you differently. They understand that disrespect no longer earns your attention. It simply loses your presence. And when your silence carries more weight than another person's noise, you have reached a level of strength that very few people ever achieve. Everything we have discussed leads to one final principle, because without it, every lesson remains incomplete. You can learn to respect yourself. You can build stronger boundaries. You can master your emotions. You can become more valuable. You can learn when to remain silent and when to walk away. But if you fail to build a reputation that consistently reflects these qualities, people will continue testing you. Human beings do not simply respond to who you are in one moment. They respond to who they believe you are over time. And that belief is called your reputation. Reputation is one of the most powerful forms of influence because it begins speaking long before you do. Before you enter a room, people often carry expectations about your character. Before you shake someone's hand, they may already have formed an opinion based on your previous actions. This is why your reputation is either opening doors you cannot see or quietly closing them before you even arrive. Many people believe reputation is built through words. They constantly tell others how loyal they are, how confident they are, how honest they are, how strong they are. But words have a very short life. Actions have a very long memory. People rarely remember what you promised. They remember what you consistently did. This is why consistency is one of the rarest forms of strength. Anyone can act disciplined for one day. Anyone can appear confident for one conversation. Anyone can remain calm during one disagreement. But doing these things repeatedly, regardless of circumstances, creates something much more powerful than temporary admiration. It creates trust. And trust becomes the foundation of respect. Imagine someone known for keeping every promise they make. If they say they will arrive at 8 o'clock, they arrive before 8. If they commit to a responsibility, it gets completed. If they establish a boundary, they never abandon it because of temporary pressure. Over time, people stop questioning their words because their behavior has already answered every question. Now imagine someone different. One day they are confident. The next day they seek approval. Sometimes they defend themselves aggressively. Other times they remain silent out of fear. Sometimes they enforce boundaries. Other times they ignore repeated disrespect. What happens? People become confused, and confusion destroys credibility. The world respects predictability when it comes to character, not because predictable people are boring, but because reliable principles create emotional security. When others know exactly where you stand, manipulation becomes difficult. One of the greatest mistakes people make is trying to appear powerful through intimidation. They raise their voices, they threaten, they seek revenge over every perceived insult. At first, this behavior may create temporary fear. But fear created through aggression eventually invites resistance. Someone stronger always appears. Someone less afraid eventually challenges them. Real influence is built differently. It comes from quiet certainty. Imagine meeting someone who never speaks badly about others unnecessarily, never breaks their word, never reacts impulsively, never abandons their values under pressure, and never allows repeated disrespect to continue. Such a person rarely needs to announce their standards. Their reputation announces them first. People naturally become more thoughtful around individuals with strong principles because they understand those principles are not negotiable. Notice that true strength never requires constant demonstrations. A mountain does not remind you of its height every morning. The ocean does not announce its depth before every wave. Its existence is enough. Your character should become like that. The less you feel the need to prove your strength, the more visible it becomes. There will always be people who misunderstand your intentions. Some will criticize you simply because your confidence reminds them of their own insecurities. Others will dislike your boundaries because they benefited from your lack of them in the past. Do not measure your reputation by the opinions of those committed to misunderstanding you. Measure it by your consistency. Ask yourself difficult questions. Do your actions match your words? Do your private habits support your public image? Do you remain respectful even when others are not? Can people depend upon your integrity regardless of the situation? These questions matter because reputation begins in private long before it becomes visible in public. Every decision contributes to it. Every promise either strengthens it or weakens it. Every difficult moment becomes another opportunity to define who you really are. Remember that people are constantly observing what you tolerate. If you repeatedly compromise your values for temporary comfort, they notice. If you repeatedly honor your principles despite temporary discomfort, they notice that as well. Eventually, your reputation reaches a point where people begin adjusting their behavior before interacting with you, not because they fear punishment, because they understand your standards. They know manipulation will not succeed. They know dishonesty will eventually cost them access. They know disrespect will quietly end the relationship instead of beginning endless arguments. This is the highest form of power, not forcing people to respect you, creating a life where respect becomes the natural consequence of your character. There is another hidden reward that many people overlook. A strong reputation does not only change how others see you, it changes how you see yourself. Every disciplined decision reinforces your identity. Every promise you keep increases your confidence. Every moment you refuse to betray your principles strengthens your self-respect. Eventually, you no longer need constant reassurance from the outside because your confidence has become internal. You stop wondering whether people approve of you. You begin asking whether your actions align with your values. That question is infinitely more powerful. Life becomes simpler when your standards stop changing with every opinion around you. Decisions become clearer. Relationships become healthier. Opportunities become more meaningful because they are built upon authenticity rather than performance. Never aim to become someone people fear because of anger, wealth, status, or authority alone. Those forms of influence disappear when circumstances change. Instead, become someone people respect. Because your character remains steady, circumstances become difficult. When your name becomes associated with integrity, emotional discipline, quiet confidence, unwavering standards, and consistent action, people will think carefully before crossing your boundaries. Not because they fear your reaction, but because they recognize the value of your presence and the certainty of your principles. And that is the kind of respect that no one can give you, no one can take from you, and no amount of disrespect can ever destroy.